when we're talking about addictions broadly, that you'll notice that the word almost never shows up in the DSM. Only recently in this text revision, maybe it was in the five originally, but they said where you can find stuff on anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, whatnot. They have a whole section dedicated to what they call substance use and addictive disorders. So they finally started using the word addiction because addiction is very subjective in its definition, but for colloquial purposes, we all know what it is. And I'm holding this on the screen. You can't see it if you're listening, but the DSM is now, it's pretty thick. It's 1,050 pages long. And the addiction section is the longest chapter of all of them. It's 122 pages. And of the things listed, the way they list them out is they're all sort of spectrumized. It's like mild, moderate, severe. And then it has to do with what substance you're using: alcohol, opioids, cannabis, hallucinogens, etc. There's only one that's not substance related, and it's gambling. Now, so you might hear some people say in the community, wow, video games are not an addiction. Porn is not an addiction. Sex is not an addiction. Softball is not an addiction. Eating is not an addiction. And to Eddie's point earlier, yeah, it absolutely is. Because even though they're not listed in the book, we all know people who can't pull themselves off of their devices. And I'm holding up my phone right here. And, if you're getting a little red in the face, or you feel like we're talking about you, that may be an indicator that you're maybe overusing what you need to set aside from time to time, including the phone. And I'll just say I'm guilty. When my kids are staring at me, and they're 8 and 6 years old right now, and they say, "Dad, can you come do whatever? Come play Legos with me, come outside with me," and I'm on my phone doing whatever it is I'm doing on my phone. And they say, "Oh, sorry, you're doing something." That should ping some embarrassment with me, that I'm choosing the phone over them. And this language of choice, I think, is really important, because it's not to incur any sort of sense of guilt or shame, but it's to put personal responsibility in the lap of the person who's experiencing this. Eddie made a great analogy with the hypothetical lady who's addicted to methamphetamine, who chooses meth over her kids. And that absolutely is a choice. Now, to her, it doesn't feel like a choice. In her brain and her body, she's craving this thing. Well, what's interesting is that gambling, video games, sex, eating, cell phone usage, and a whole litany of other things that have nothing to do with ingesting chemicals have the same neurological effect, the same rewiring of circuitry that Eddie's talking about. And a lot of it can be explained by what you're choosing over the alternative. So if we interview a person and we say, what's this pattern of behavior about? And I'm interchanging process versus behavior with regard to these types of addictions. Sorry. So, but the important distinction to make, man, I can't speak this morning. It has been a long time since we've done a podcast. The important distinction to make is the difference between ingesting a substance and performing an activity. Okay. So if I have dealt with this before, this is not a made up story. If I have somebody sitting in front of me who's addicted to an extracurricular activity, in this particular case, the gentleman's drug of choice was beer league softball, which he played like 6 nights a week, and most weekends he'd have a tournament. And what it came down to, after a thorough, robust biopsychosocial interview, was that he had intimacy issues. He didn't have a good sense of self-efficacy. He had vulnerability problems, and he was basically abandoning his wife and kids to go play softball with the boys, because he drew a sense of love and affection and accomplishment and achievement by being good at softball 6 nights a week, most weekends had a tournament. And what he was avoiding was home life. So when we got the wife in the room, we had a conversation about it. It was very revealing to learn that, he grew up in a home where he didn't have a strong father figure. His mom was working a lot. And he never learned a healthy attachment style. All he learned was like self-efficacy through doing things, accomplishing things. So when it came time to, date and get married and have kids, he worked through those motions, but ultimately never actually left behind the extracurricular activities, and was unable to engage his wife, and his marriage was on the verge of collapse because of softball. So you absolutely can have the same neurological effect where you're chasing a high, because your brain has gotten used to that thrill mechanism. You can also have the same type of addictive property based solely on avoidance of something like intimacy. And we see this all the time with kids these days, if I could put that in air quotes, kids these days on their devices. They may look like what has, some approximate definition of a relationship to other children online, but they're lacking the interpersonal, in-person interface. So you may have a bunch of surface level interactions with people online through Roblox or, Minecraft or Call of Duty or something like that. But what you're actually missing is in-person relationships. And the draw to go back to that is, yes, there's better graphics on screens now, and there's virtual reality, and there's augmented reality, and things in the interweb domain can actually seem more like reality, but the relationships are not. So what are you doing with this particular type of addiction? In my mind, is I think that you're avoiding the intimacy that comes with interpersonal relationships. It's easy to unplug. It's easy to turn off the console. It's easy to jump to a different platform or world or game. And if somebody pisses you off on the interwebs, you say, well, screw it, I'm out of here. You don't ever actually have to reconcile any relationships. So it's interesting to me. I pulled up an article, where is it? Written in 2012. It's on the National Library of Medicine. Anybody can see this. And the title is literally Behavioral Addiction versus Substance Addiction, Correspondence of Psychiatric and Psychological Views. And written in 2012, published in 2012, April of 2012. And that's interesting to me because the DSM-5 came out in 2013. And the DSM-5 text revision, which is the blue one I'm holding in my hand, was published just a year ago, 2022. And they still have yet to incorporate some of these other process or behavioral addictions into the actual book. So I don't know what the foot dragging is about on this. We even have tobacco addiction in here, which is interesting. They say that, and they don't say nicotine. They say tobacco specifically, which is very bizarre to me because we've had smokeless, spitless tobacco since at least 2006 or something, when my brother was working for Philip Morris and Altria selling snus, and we'd never heard of that before. And now we have Zyn all over the country taking over college campuses. So it's not just tobacco anymore. And one would have to wonder if you carry our credentials and a person comes in saying, I really need to quit my nicotine pouches, we go, well, technically you don't qualify because it's not tobacco. like we got to update the language as a field, and we have to be more open with our ideas on what constitutes this stuff. So that being the foundation laid for this conversation, I'm curious what everybody's thoughts are, because we can see people getting addicted to lots of things, including politics and narratives and holding too tightly to their belief systems and worldviews, causing fights, and those will cause the same, like Eddie said, hold my beer type of response. When you're drunk at a bar, the reason that we have lots of fights and I love you, man, is because the alcohol numbs the prefrontal cortex, that frontal lobe part of your brain, and allows all the emotions to flow. You can get addicted to that too, especially if you've been bottling up a lot of emotions. And certainly, interacting online can create a lot of emotionality. So if you don't have a place to offload that, guess where you go? More online, right?